So how important do you think it is to be outside? Because this is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently.
Well, we evolved to be outside. So again, the people that know me knows that I base everything that I do and teach and research on nature because that's how we evolved. So we cannot be healthy without taking nature into the equation. And of course, it's a big issue today. And I believe that a lot of the issues with the chronic diseases and cancer and all-cause mortality in general is based on the fact that we are simply not outside enough. So in general, we are shielding our natural environment by being inside, non-native EMFs, artificial lighting, air pollution, all that stuff. So yeah, basically, it's one of the most important things that we can do.
Yes, no, I think so. That's what I keep seeing in my research. So if we talk about artificial light, then, because I feel like there's a double whammy going on at the minute. We're not outside enough, and then when we're inside, we've got all this artificial light. So, can you talk a bit about anything evidence based when it comes to artificial light? Like, what are the problems? Because I've heard people talk about LED bulbs being an issue and the flickering and other things. So if you could just give us a little bit on that, that'd be useful.
Yeah, so there are two things basically, which is the main issue. And the first thing you mentioned is the flickering. The second thing, more importantly, is the spectrum of the light that we get. So from modern LED lightings, we mainly get the blue light spectrum of the light spectrum. And this is a pretty new issue because it's not many years ago that we transitioned from the incandescent bulbs, which had a much wider light spectrum that resembled more the sun, because the sun has the widest light spectrum. It has all colors of the rainbow, and that's how we evolved to be exposed to, from the UV range to the blue range to the infrared range. So the main problem with the new lighting, the LED lighting, is that we only get a very narrow bandwidth of this light spectrum that the sun emits. And that's an issue because our mitochondria, which is the powerhouses of our bodies, need lights to produce the energy that our bodies require. So if we don't get sunlight, we don't have the energy supply for our bodies to run it. And that's why I say that all disease, like at least 90%, comes down to mitochondria deficiency. So in general, that's the issue. And today we get too much blue light. That's basically everything we get. Even if we are inside, like in Denmark here, we have now, I believe, 16 hours of daylight. So when I wake up in the morning, it's sunlight. When I go to bed, there is still sunlight. So the sun hasn't set yet. And this means that we don't have to turn on any indoor lights. So you would say, okay, problem solved. You don't have any blue light in the summer half year here in Denmark. But although we don't have any indoor lights turned on, the full light spectrum of the sun is not able to penetrate the windows. So only some of the infrared rays are able to penetrate. Very little of the UV is able to penetrate, and all of the blue light is able to penetrate. So that's why also right now when I'm sitting here, I have the blue light blockers on, because even though I don't have any artificial lighting turned on, I still get the toxic or the isolated blue light from the sun.
Interesting. I hadn't
So
considered
that's an
that.
issue.
Yeah, sure. I hadn't thought about that. Okay, so there's that filter going on. So what are you doing in the winter then? So how are you managing this when it's dark and cold outside?
Well, it's actually not a problem because, again, despite the winter months here in Denmark, again, we have a lot of light instability. So in the winter months, we have like 6 or 7 daylight hours of the day. Doesn't matter. Just go outside, because even on a cloudy day, you get enough sunlight. So you can measure it in lux. So on a clear day like today here in Denmark, you get at least 100,000 lux light exposure from the sun. On a completely overcast day, you get maybe like 5,000 lux. In comparison, when you're inside in a fully lit, artificially lit environment, you get 300-400 lux. So you can see what I mean. You cannot regulate your circadian rhythm at all by being indoor, even though you have artificial light for an entire day. So even though it's dark for the majority of the day, just getting regular natural lights is the solution. So that's part of the solution. But then there's also another interesting fact, which comes down to biophotons. Biophotons is internal light that our mitochondria creates. This is a very new field. There are some studies on it. For example, Albert St. George many years ago looked into this, but it's kind of been neglected today. But it seems to be that because of this biophotonic emission within the mitochondria, we can create the light that we don't get from the sun. So, for example, within the energy production system in the mitochondria called the electron transport chain, we could produce infrared lights. So this is some part of the sun spectrum, but also during, for example, cold exposure, whether it's cold weather or it's a cold shower or a cold plunge, the mitochondria switches on to produce UV light in a biophoton state. So the UV light that we don't get from the sun during the winter, we can create ourselves, for example, by doing cold exposure.
Interesting. Okay. Now, are you supplementing with vitamin D during the winter, or are you getting your shirt off outside?
Oh.
Like, how are you managing your vitamin D levels?
Absolutely not. I haven't been doing that for a lot of years. Actually, I'm not supplementing that much anymore. I don't supplement vitamin D. No, I take cod liver oil, which is very rich in vitamin D, and it's a natural form of fish oil, if you can say it like that. That gives you the vitamin D that you don't get from the sun. So to say it short, in the winter months, I get my vitamin D from my diets. And I've been testing this. I get blood tests every winter and every summer, and my vitamin D levels have been sufficiently high, even though I don't supplement it. So I guess that is evident that we don't need to supplement any potential toxic supplements to get the things that we can get from nature still. So no, I don't believe that anyone should supplement an artificial substance like that.
So break that down for me, because this is really interesting, by the way, because I've spoke to a few people about this, but I've not been able to get a clear answer. Some people said that the vitamin D tablets we take are kind of held in like a vegetable oil, and that's a problem. But then you can get some that don't. But so from your perspective, what is the biggest risks or problems or concerns with us taking a vitamin D tablet? Hey, it's Mike here, and if you're like me and you're doing breath work at night to slow down, get still and prepare for sleep, there's a problem. You're staring at screens under bright lights and they're telling your brain it's high noon. And the blue and green light from your phone and your laptop and your ceiling, well, it shuts down melatonin and it keeps your nervous system wired. You cannot sleep deeply when your brain thinks the sun is still out. And so Raw Optics sunset lenses are a game changer. You put them on after dark and your body gets the signal it's time to rest. Within minutes, you feel it, calm and relaxed, ready to sink into real sleep. These aren't a gimmick. They are built by the world's top light researchers, and they're used by pro athletes and doctors and people who truly understand human performance. So use code TADB10 for 10% off at rawoptics.com. Again, that's TADB10 for 10% off, and you will not want to go to bed without them. I've been using Raw Optics for years. Okay, let's get back on with the show. Cheers.
Well, it's not just vitamin D, it's supplements in general that they don't replicate the real source that we need. So I would say in general, because they don't replicate the real source, and like you say, potentially contains a lot of artificial and toxic substances, we should get everything that we can from diet. The only caveat that is here is that our soil has been polluted to a point that we no longer get the micronutrients from the diet that we need. So in some cases, it can be necessary. But I'm at a point right now where I, like I said, don't supplement much, if at all any. And if I do, I get it from a real food source, like, for example, cod liver oil, which is a supplement that is sourced by real foods. Or, for example, beef liver capsules, which is basically just powdered beef liver, which is the richest, the micronutrient richest food source on the planet. So basically, if you eat beef liver, you get 97% of all the micronutrients that you need. So that's my perspective on this. I try to get as much from natural food sources as possible. But for example, with magnesium, We know that most people are deficient in magnesium. It's difficult to get the right values from food. I supplement with that. I supplement with creatine for the same reason, glycine. So but I keep it at a minimum for the same reasons, that we
Yeah.
can get most of what we need from natural sources.
Okay. And so with cod liver then, if you were to take, I don't know, like an 85 kilogram male, like how much cod liver oil would you be, how much are you taking, or how much would you recommend like a healthy adult take to top up the vitamin D?
Well, roughly a teaspoon, roughly a teaspoon.
Okay.
And but again, there's also the other parts of this. I cannot say how much a person should take or not take, and there's also who makes these values. Like, are these recommended values even correct?
Mm.
Because from the cod liver oil that I take, I get sufficiently or remarkably much lower levels of vitamin D that a vitamin D pill would give me. But even though I keep my vitamin D levels high, so to say how much, that's difficult. But I take a teaspoon. That's pretty little, but it is so rich in vitamin D, for example, vitamin E, DHA, that it's sufficiently enough to cover your needs.
Okay. This is really cool. So do you feel like the way that, I don't know, some people use the term bioavailability, is it just that the vitamin D you're taking in cod liver oil, it's different, it's a different structure to the tablet? Is it reacting in a different way in our body, do you think?
Yeah, it's more bioavailable, yeah. But again, I want to make a disclaimer here that I'm not a clinician. I'm not a dietitian. So to get in here and teach people about the vitamin D synthesis from cod liver oil versus an artificial supplements, that's not my field. From a biohacking perspective, I'm just as much an experiment on myself that I'm a researcher. But from this perspective, I will leave it to someone with more knowledge than me in the
useful.
field.
Yeah, well, no, this is a very interesting little rabbit hole that we've gone down.
It is.
So if we talk then about mechanics, because this was the big thing I wanted to talk to you about, breath mechanics, the body moving, how we breathe. Could you just talk to us a little bit about some of the work you do with athletes and just give us like a helicopter view of some of the things that you're doing with breath, with movement, and then we can maybe dig into some of that.
Sure. So basically what we do is, if we zoom out, everything is about the fascia. So I learned about the fascia in 2019. That was when I came down this major rabbit hole that made a huge change for myself and my clients and my entire business. So fascia is this unified field that connects the entire body. And because it connects the entire body and encloses everything from the muscles to the bones, to the tissues, to the organs, even down to the cellular level, it means that everything you do must be interconnected. That's why I talk a lot about mainstream fitness being insufficient, because what we do mainly is activate a few muscles at a time and isolate the body. And by taking fascia into the equation, we know that might not be the best idea, because our body needs to be stimulated the way that the fascia holds the body. So basically, to say it short, we do a lot of multidimensional movement. It means movement that connects the entire body. And I know that you're a breath guy. So let's talk about the breath work as well, because breathing is just as important. In fact, I have my system called quantum biomechanics, and I have it in different layers because we cannot just assess the body from all around one at a time. We need to, at least modern humans today with so many dysfunctions, we need to break it a bit down. So the first thing we need to do always is to assess the fascia, because we all have fascial restrictions, whether physically or whether emotionally. They are all trauma stuck in the fascia. So even to breathe better, we know that we utilize our diaphragm in this umbrella-like motion. So even to breathe better requires a fascial system that is dehydrated and then that is released. So everything starts by releasing the fascia. We can come back to that. When we have done that, we can start improving our breathing, even before we do the biomechanic stuff, even before we do all the movement stuff, because breathing is the foundation of movement. It is basically 50% of the movement that you do. So there I break it down. My protocol is called the RSA breathing, standing for release, strengthening, and activating. That's the things that I believe that we need to do with our system. So we need to release the myofascia that is responsible for our respiratory muscles. We have a lot of respiratory muscles in our body that are guiding the breathing. So just like we need to release the fascial system in general, we need to do the same with our respiratory muscles as well, in order for these muscles to guide breathing the best possible way. When we have done that, we can strengthen our respiratory system. That can be done, for example, people know Wim Hof with the breath holding. This strengthens the diaphragm. This can also be done in other various ways, in which I do a lot, by compressing the thoracic cavity, putting on bands on the torso, and then breathing against these bands. This is just like doing a biceps curl. This is just a biceps curl for your diaphragm. That is strengthening that as well. So when you have this foundation, you can now begin to activate it. Like learning how to breathe, learning how to expand the rib cage in a 360-degree direction, but also learning how to do nose breathing properly, how to tolerate CO2 better, how to use your tongue posture to guide your breathing better. So that is the foundation of my system that I teach people in before we can progress to posture, to mobility, to biomechanics, etc. So that is the very important foundation of it all.
Yeah, so RSA, I love that. So before we get into the release, which I'm fascinated to get your thoughts on, can you talk a bit about the fascia system? Like, is it an alive system? Is there certain foods or nutrients that system needs? I know people talk about, or what's the supplement we take for flexibility? People talk about different supplements for flexibility and things. So can you just talk?
Collagen?
No. So
yeah.
Go
okay.
Ahead,
I'm not sure what supplement you refer to, but collagen would make sense.
Collagen. That was the one.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. So collagen would make sense since fascia is mainly collagen, and that's the interesting thing of it, because fascia is not just collagen; it's also water. So it's very slimy and glidey, which is the foundation of the problems that we have today. Because when fascia stops being slimy and glidey, and becomes dehydrated, it stocks. So it impairs movement on the muscles. This is why we get chronic pain and movement dysfunction, because of dehydrated fascia. So we need to nourish the system. To say that we need to supplement collagen, I don't think that I agree with that, because the collagen within our fascia is different from the collagen that we supplement with. But what we can do is hydrate our bodies, but not in the way that you may think that we can, because chugging water won't hydrate the fascia. That's an internal process that hydrates the fascia, because fascia can be hydrated intracellularly, meaning the hydration that is produced by the mitochondria, for example, but it can also be hydrated extracellularly, so outside the cells, for example, via the lymphatic system and so on. So when we are myofascially dehydrated and it doesn't glide enough, it means that some of these pathways are impaired. So what we can do basically is to do myofascial releases, massages, improve our movements to get this hydration flow working again, so that the fascia can glide properly against the muscles again. We can actually see this model, because this is a tensegrity model. I don't know if you have seen it before, but this shows how fascia operates. So healthy fascia, if you see these black lines as fascia and these sticks as being the bones, so in a healthy fascial system, the body can operate like this. So everything connects to everything. But when fascia becomes dehydrated, it rearranges the bones to become stuck in a position, and the movements will consequently be impaired. That's what we see in postural dysfunctions, like forward hunched shoulders or forward neck or forward hip posture, something like that. That is basically because of the fascial system becoming dehydrated and dysfunctional. So they rearranges the muscles to become stuck in an insufficient system.
Wow. So the next question then is, how do we hydrate our fascia? Because does salty water help with that? I hear this is I've always wanted to talk about hydration actually, because I know that sometimes people say like you need certain, like for example, I've heard like watermelon's great for hydration because the liquid's attached in a different form. So, but I don't know. So like over to you, like how do we
Yeah.
hydrate our fascia?
Yeah, but that's two different things. Because, like I said, fascial hydration cannot come from chugging water. You cannot just drink water and believe that you can hydrate your fascia that way. That's an internal process from doing releases like myofascial releases, massages, good movement, etc. That is, again, stimulating the entire connected system so that water can flow sufficiently around the entire system. That's the fascia hydration process. The other thing is hydrating our bodies sufficiently through what we drink. And like you said, watermelon is great. Coconut water is great. Electrolyte water, salt water is great because these electrolytes or these micronutrients help with the absorption of the water into our bodies. So the worst thing you can do is just chugging plain water, basically, which also makes another issue with all these water filtration systems that are so popular today. Because what they basically do is they don't just remove the bad stuff, they also remove the good stuff. They remove all the micronutrients and all the minerals that are supposed to hydrate our bodies. So the best solution is to hydrate through food sources, as you suggest, yeah.
Gotcha. And so if you've got a dehydrated body because you're not drinking enough water with electrolytes, would that translate to a dehydrated fascia system or not necessarily?
Not necessarily, no, because it's two different things. And again, it's interesting with the fascia because not only is it rich in collagen, which we know is a semiconductor, so it has bioelectric abilities, but it's also rich in exclusion zone water, EC water. And the special thing about EC water is that it's charge separated, meaning that it separates protons from electrons so that it gets a net negative charge, again supporting our bioelectric system within the body. So the issue with fascial dehydration is not just this mechanical thing that we talked about, but also the bioelectric component of our bodies, the semiconductive abilities that makes it harder for this communicative pathway that fascia is to communicate. And it is actually a pretty big deal because if we compare, we know neurons are some of the fastest communicators within the body, communicating at around 120 meters per second. Fascia, if it works properly, it communicates almost instantaneously, almost at the speed of light. And this is 225 million meters per second. So this is how the body communicates from cells to organs to everything. It utilizes the fascia because of its semiconductive components. So it is two different things, but we cannot neglect the importance of keeping our fascia hydrated because it's not just water, it's exclusion zone, charge separated water.
Gotcha. So let's talk about the release then. So like, are you doing this hands-on with people? Are you getting them to do self-directed exercises online at home? Can you just give us the view of like, what does release look like for you with your clients? Hey, just to let you know, we have recently put together a 60-minute completely free training which walks you through our reset protocol. This is a method that I've built over the last 9 or 10 years, and it combines the best of everything that I've learned when it comes to breath work and body work and how our system works to help us reduce stress, increase energy, and feel calm and relaxed. The training's down below. You can register for free. And if you've got any questions, you can fire them through to my team. All right, let's get back on with the show.
Sure. Of course, when I have my clients, which I don't do that much anymore, I do it manually. But the end goal is always to teach people how to release themselves. And I also have an educational platform where I don't communicate one-on-one with people. So it is the most important thing that they know how to release it themselves. So to do the self-myofascial releases, you need to apply pressure. You need to apply pressure on the fascia in order to rehydrate the tissues that are dehydrated. So if we take an analogy, the sponge analogy, if you consider that you compress a sponge, you apply compression to the sponge and you put it in a bowl of water and you release the sponge, then it attracts water into the sponge. That's basically what you do with your fascia when you apply pressure to the fascia. So when you release this pressure after X amount of time, you attract water back into the tissues. So that is why we do myofascial releases and how it works. And this can be, when not manually, this can be with a little lacrosse ball, with a bigger medicine ball, with a stick, a theracane, something like that. Maybe the handle of a kettlebell. You can be creative. You just need a hard surface to apply the pressure. And everybody has myofascial releases because of our modern sedentary lifestyle. And this expresses as persistent pain. So pain that is not induced by you being in the gym last day, but pain that persists, or movement impairment of these postural issues that we talked about. So when you address and recognize where these issues are, for example, persistent pain in the chest, you apply this pressure for minutes at a time, and rough pressure so you can feel the pain, while, again, speaking of integrating the breathing into the practice, so you relax your nervous system, get into a parasympathetic state, and then slowly you're rehydrating these dehydrated tissues. So after a while, this can be a week, a month, a year for some maybe, then the tissues are reintegrated again, and the fascial system within that area is reorganized. Does it make sense?
It does. It does make sense. Yeah. So are you holding like a static compression, or are you working it, or is it a bit of both for people?
No, you need to hold sort of a static pressure, because the myofascial system is often very small, and you need to concentrate that pressure. So I would say 90% of the time you hold a static pressure to keep the tension all on the specific particular area. Or you can do slow, gentle movement across the area. But to keep it bigger, like a normal massage, where you run across the muscle, that's not sufficiently enough to hit the deep fascia, because these restrictions are pretty deep.
Okay.
We have a deep fascial layer and we have a superficial fascial layer. And that can be centimeters within the body. So you can see that these soft glides within the skin or across the skin is not enough to reach the deep fascial layers.
Gotcha. And if like a 10 was like a max pressure and a 1 is like I'm just touching it, I know it's going to vary by person, but like how deep are we going? How much pressure would we put, do you think, on that kind of scale for somebody?
80%.
Okay, so like an 8 out of 10. So it could be painful then for some people, right?
It should be painful.
It should be painful. Okay, talk about that.
Because the myofascial restrictions, or the restriction, is a persistent pain, or it appears to be pain. So if you're not feeling that pain, then you're not reaching the area that it's where it stays. So that's why we need to feel this pain. Again, if we don't feel the pain, there's a risk that we are only reaching the superficial fascial layers that is just below the dermis, and then we're not reaching into the deeper layers that can sufficiently rehydrate these layers.
Yeah.
So that's why pain is important in this process, and that's also why scrolling or watching a podcast or doing whatever meanwhile you do it is no-go, because you need to stay within the sensation. This is also an emotional release. For many people, emotions are stored as magnetic fields within the fascia, actually. So we need to be mindful about where we are in our bodies, and also, like I said, include the breathing, because the breathing is the direct access to our nervous system. So if we stay in this sympathetic stress state, then we are not allowing for the deep fascial release to occur.
Yeah, okay. What breathing are you doing then with people when they're going through fascia release?
I'm doing my parasympathetic breathing stuff. And based on science, we know that if we exhale longer than we inhale, the respiratory rate lowers, the heart rate consequently lowers, and the sympathetic or the nervous system slowly transitions from a sympathetic state to a parasympathetic state, the rest and digest state. So this can be as twice as long an exhalation as the inhalation, or even better, 3 times as long.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of studies on exhaling for 3 times longer than you inhale, just for a few seconds, to see how that remarkably improves your nervous system. So I often do it for 3 seconds of inhalation, then I exhale for 9 seconds, and then I hold for maybe 2, 3, or 4 seconds, because when you are at the bottom of your exhalation, your heart rate is as low as possible so we can actually extend that state. So when we inhale, heart rate increases. When we exhale, the heart rate slows down. So the longer we can be in this exhalation phase, the more our heart will slow down. So that is basically the practice that you can do. Just exhale longer than you inhale.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. I like that 3-9-2 kind of process. So I've been through some fascia release stuff. There's somebody local that I went to, and he spent a lot of time working the kind of sternum and the clavicles and under the diaphragm. And I actually thought it was a bit gentle. It was probably like a 4 or 5 out of 10. I was like, I can take more, but it was very, very gentle approach. What I took away from that process though, and this is probably just my like ADHD brain. So it's a very slow process. And so when I've tried to do it at home, I feel like I could spend like half an hour and I've only just done one shoulder. So is it a slow process? Like how much time does it take to really do the fascia? Because I feel like you'd be there all day if you had to cover the whole body, but maybe you need to.
Oh, you could. If we compare it with exercise, you know that you're not supposed to exercise a muscle in the gym for more than once every other or 3 days. It's kind of the same with fascia. So when you release a fascial area for like 2 to 10 minutes, which is the threshold, if you ask me, then you cannot do it the next day because it needs to release this slight inflammation that you make on the fascia. So it's kind of the same when we exercise, we go through this super compensation phase where we recover for a few days to get better on the third day. That's kind of the same with the fascia. So we release it and it gets a little bit worse until it gets better again. And on day 2 or 3, you can re-release that area again. And again, it depends whether or from person to person, if this takes a week or a month or a year, or maybe something in between. So personally, I went through a 3-month period on releasing my entire body without doing anything else. So that tells you how comprehensive that it is. And it's also my view when I assess clients that this is a month-long process if you need to go through everything. And also remember that every time you do something being physically active like resistance training or running or anything that may impair the process because of your dysfunctional movement pattern, then you're doing a slight setback. So ideally, you would be doing the myofascial releases in a process without doing anything else to sufficiently target this before moving on. But again, like I tell my practitioners, we are also just humans. So we need to do something. We need to run. We need to go to the gym or do our sports or whatever we do. But this is a long process, and yeah, you need to tackle it the way that you tackle going to the gym and training your muscles normally.
Okay, I really like that advice because I think sometimes we're in a place where we go and we want to do 30 different modalities at once, right? And sometimes there's that power in just slowing down. Have you got any experience or thoughts on red light therapy and fascia release? Is there any connection there? Do you know?
Yeah, actually, recently, within the last year, I started implementing red light therapy to my myofascial releases. After discovering all this, we talked briefly about fascia and EC water and how it relates to the semiconductive abilities within the body. Because, again, fascial releases is a hydration process. So we do the myofascial releases to rehydrate the fascia. Red light therapy is also a hydration process because when we are exposed to red light, even from the sun is the most dominant battery of red light, we are charging the water within our bodies. So again, like I told you, when the water within our bodies becomes negatively charged, it becomes this EC water that is nourishing our bioelectric system within the body. So the goal is here to not only rehydrate the fascia, but also expose it to these light emissions, for example, the infrared light that is increasing these charge separation within the water. So yes, it's a very good idea to do red light therapy while you do the releases, just like taking creatine is a very good idea when you do your resistance training. But again, we need to remember that red light comes from the sun. We have just made it artificial within a panel that uses LED lights. It's a very good supplement. It's a great supplement in the winter. It's a great supplement when it's raining and you cannot do your releases outside. But apart from that, you get the full benefits of red and infrared light therapy just from doing your stuff in the sun. So yes, we do the myofascial releases with light therapy, but we also do the movement with light therapy, because movement is also a mitochondrial process. And we know that mitochondria requires lights. And again, back to the thing that I'm saying with traditional fitness and doing everything up in a gym, you're basically improving your body under artificial lighting. So you are only improving yourself half. So if you want the full spectrum of the benefits that you're searching, do it outside. Do it under natural light, regardless of whether the sun is shining or it's an overcast day, or do it in front of an infrared panel. That's still much, much better than doing it under blue lights.
Yes, that's I love that. What about earthing? What are your thoughts on like earthing / grounding? Is there any connection to the fascia release there or not?
Absolutely. I'm not sure whether it improves the fascial releases. Of course, we get a lot of electrons when we do the grounding, and electrons is very dominant within our bodies, within the water that we carry, within the energy production system in the mitochondria. But yes, again, we need to remember that just as a plant is photosynthesizing, so are we. So when we are outside, bare feet on the grass, we're getting electrons within our bodies that is nourishing the water inside our bodies. We're getting the sunlight from the sun. We are inhaling the oxygen, exhaling the carbon dioxide, just like plants. Plants have their roots in the ground, harvesting electrons. They have a lot of water inside them, similarly to humans. They rely on sunlight. They don't breathe in oxygen. They breathe in carbon dioxide, but they breathe out oxygen. So we have this opposite relationship respiratorily. But humans are basically just the same. Think about that. So when people say that, oh, grounding is bullshit and there's not much science on that, no, maybe not, but intuitively, it makes super sense that we need this connection with Mother Earth.
Yeah, no, I'm all in. You know, we've got the earth sheet on the bed that's going out the window into the dirt, and you know,
great.
Yes. But you know what I don't do, and what I've been playing with, and just after talking to you, is like the idea of working out with your shirt off, with your feet on the grass, you know, outdoors. Yes. It just sounds like it's the optimal way to kind of move your body, right?
Sure. Just remember, everything is a mitochondrial process. So if it is a mitochondrial process, then we need to do it outside. Because mitochondria requires grounding, it requires sunlight or natural lights in general. So doing your stuff outside is the best way to get the results. Otherwise, you're just doing it half and you won't get the results. You're only damaging your mitochondria. Yeah. So apart from that, also back to the isolating movement stuff, what we tend to do in a gym is isolating the body. So you're not just isolating from nature, you're also isolating your fascia from what it's meant to be. And it's meant to move in rotations, in multidimensional movement planes. During these kind of complex stuff that we did back in the day, where all we did was walking or running or hunting, that was all based on these multidimensional movements. But somehow today we believe that we can move away from that, again, moving away from nature, and improve our bodies from doing isolated stuff. And I think part of the reason why we think that, or why we want to believe it, is because we have found out that doing that makes us more muscular. We get bigger biceps, we get a six-pack, we look better. So people tend to neglect the fact that fascia must be trained multidimensionally because they get the masculine results that they do from doing these isolated movements.
Yeah. Now, I know you've spent time with Wim Hof. I know you've also spent time with Patrick McEwen, and I often look at those two as like, you know, opposite ends of a bookcase in terms of what they're doing. Yeah. What I would love to get your thoughts on is fascia with the breathing, and I'll just dig into that a little bit more. So I feel like with Wim Hof, you're going to get like real good movement of the diaphragm, and probably the lymphatic system's moving around a lot, and maybe cerebral spinal fluids moving around. So we're getting a lovely, but then you're probably getting some vasoconstriction with that hyperventilation work. On the Patrick McKeown side, if we do slow breathing and breath holds, maybe there's a vasodilation that's happening and opening up. So which one of those techniques would you move towards more when it comes to like helping the fascia system, or is it a bit of both?
Absolutely, the oxygen advantage stuff from Patrick McKeown. Also, 50% of my breathing component in my system is based on his work, and that's kind of the CO2 tolerance part that we can learn to do more with less. So that's my short answer, because I don't really think that Wim is on the right path when it comes to that, because as you say, there might be some risk factors here that we neglect with the vasoconstriction, with the lack of oxygen supply to our brains that might do damage. We don't know yet. So to say something positive about Wim, he is a lovely guy, and his method is very interesting. It might get you to a psychedelic state when we do this breathing. There might be a connection between the fact that DMT can be released within the cerebrospinal fluid inside the spinal cords. It's just a theory. We don't have much research on it yet, but it is a theory that when we do these hyperventilations combined with breath holds and muscular contractions within the pelvic floor, that we can elevate the DMT within the spine up towards the pineal glands. So that's what I have of positive things to say about the Wim Hof method. But from a performance perspective, from a longevity perspective, I'm not so sure that works. So I'm definitely on the Patrick McKeown side there, because we need to lower our respiratory rates. We need to nose breathe. We need to be better at tolerating CO2 better, because that's more efficient from the oxygen supply within our bodies. So definitely from that perspective, that's what I'm utilizing in my own biomechanical work. The Wim Hof stuff is just spiritual, psychedelic. I've had some amazing experiences there myself as well. But whether it's because of oxygen supply to my brain diminishing and I'm getting a small brain damage, or whether it's a psychedelic experience, I can only wonder.
Yeah, same. No, I was originally trained by Wim in 2016, and I've since trained with Patrick as well. But I've had some beautiful experiences with the Hof breathing. But I don't really do it much these days now. It's more OA based work.
What did you feel? With
Wim?
With Wim, yeah.
Oh my goodness! So this was in Poland in 2016, and Wim was guiding us for about an hour and a half. So we did about an hour and a half of deep breathing with him standing above you, screaming. A big emotional release. I mean, I'm going back nearly a decade now. The big thing that I experienced, I've told this before on the podcast, was I had a communication with another being, and there was like a third eye, and we had a little chat, and it basically said to me, I'm so glad that you're here. And they went, see you later. And it just left. I was like, whoa. So that was the big thing that happened. But yeah, a lot of emotional release. There was one point where one of the guys on the trip, there was like 20 of us in the class, his best friend and dad had both committed suicide that year. And so he was in a deep state of grief. And I remember him just letting out this big wail, this big, like, it's one of the worst sounds I've ever heard, this big, like, noise. And then what happened was, this was day one. None of us knew each other, but we all started crying, and we ended up all cuddling and touching him. It was like, what the hell is going on? So that was a pretty powerful experience. So yeah, we had some good times with Wim. It was very special.
Yeah. So that's what I mean with the psychedelic stuff, that there's happening some things within this area that he's teaching people in that's unexplainable.
Yes.
And I've had the same experiences, myself breaking out into laughter, people breaking out into tears, my friend getting a seizure without knowing what happened, and I see that every time I'm down there at his place. So I think there is a deeper thing to it, but we don't know yet, and I need to know things before I
Yeah.
recommend things to people,
Yeah.
right?
No, sure. Are you familiar with trauma release exercises, TRE?
Not in the specific way that I think you are referring to.
Oh, okay. I was just curious to get your thoughts because I did a TRE podcast last week actually, and
Okay.
the short version is that you get your body into a natural tremor response. You fatigue the muscles so they start to tremor, and then you can move that tremor up and down the body. Anyway, I was going into what they were calling fascia release stretches. My body was doing this. There's a couple. I can send you a video on it. It's fascinating work, but essentially the way the guy discovered this was he was in Beirut when bombs were dropping, and he noticed the children would shake and then they'd go and play, and the adults were just stuck all day. And so the adults were doing a really good job of suppressing their tremor response. And you'll see this in nature all the time, right? You see an animal that's captured and then it's released and it shakes it off. So David Baselli, Dr. Baselli, he essentially triggers the natural tremor response in your body. But the reason I'm bringing it up with you is I'm getting a lot of what they would call fascia stretch positions. Like my body will just do this for ages and then it will release. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Okay, so the fascial stretches, as you call them, is a natural process of the trauma release.
Part of it, yeah. I'll send you the podcast I did with the guy. Actually, I think you might find it interesting. But he was watching me go through the process, and he was like, "Yeah, this is really common. This is your fascia trying to stretch itself back out, and it'll happen a lot to me actually when I'm doing the TRE. I'll just go like this, and I'll stay like this for a minute or two." And then it will just release, and there's a lot of twisting happening, and it's the body doing it. It's not the mind. The body, you just remove. It takes a while to remove you from the position, and then the body just kicks in. It's very, very interesting.
I think that is the subconscious part of the trauma that is releasing within the area of the fascia that you are accidentally hitting. Because I see the same with my myofascial releases, at least when I'm doing hands-on on clients, where I can direct my energy towards them. Like if we release a spot where an emotional trauma is hidden, not just a physical trauma, but an emotional trauma, then the emotional trauma gets released, like literally, if it's tears or anger or sadness or whatever it is, merely by releasing this area where the emotional trauma was stored. So I believe that is kind of the same that you're saying, that when you release this area and you do this fascial stretch, maybe this is the area that stretches where the emotional trauma, in fact, was stored.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, they talk a lot about the intelligence of the body. You know, the fascia system. It's incredible. So I would love to get your thoughts on. So I know I think in Chinese medicine they talk about meridian lines and things are connected, and I've heard people talk about, for example, the feet are connected fascially to the diaphragm and to the rib cage. I don't know if that's true, but if you could talk about some of these big connections, in particular with breathing, because I think if people have got tight feet, could that be affecting how they're breathing? So maybe if you could just bring to life some of these, what are the common areas that you might have to work with somebody on to help release their breathing a little bit?
Yeah, that's super, super, super interesting. And that's also only a while ago, maybe a couple of years, that I began wondering, because I've been studying traditional Chinese medicine some years ago. I went for an education there, which was kind of the same time that I studied fascia or discovered fascia as well. And I wondered, why are the meridians within Chinese medicine so similar to the myofascial meridians? And I also have a few pictures of them here so you can see them. These are some of the myofascial meridians, where you can see how the fascia is connected and organizes itself within the system. And if you map these and compare them to the Chinese meridians, you get almost the same spots. So I think that there is a connection here. I think that by manipulating these spots in the fascia, you're also manipulating the Chinese meridians, because they are basically the same. And what I believe they are, which was studied by Robert Becker also decades ago, is that they are simply these small acupuncture spots within the meridian on the body is simply small electrical amplifiers. So, for example, if we have a system that connects the lungs, for example, to the thumb, then we have a lot of dots, a lot of myofascial or a lot of acupuncture meridians here, that when we do the acupuncture, we stimulate the lung. This is because of the bioelectrical system within the body, within the fascia, that is organized into these systems. So like an electrical circuit, you have different amplifiers within this circuit that allows the system to communicate. This is basically what this is. And this is also why we see, as you talked about, how the foot myofascially is connected to the diaphragm, or how my neck muscles, for example, are connected to my hamstring. That's because of these systems. So it's two different things, but it's still the same. And it teaches us that we cannot teach the body locally. That if I have a hamstring issue, it doesn't mean that we have to assist the hamstring. It can be in my neck. It can be on my erector spinae muscle on my back. It can be below my foot. Consequently, if we need to improve our diaphragm function, we can stimulate the foot, or we can stimulate the tongue, which is also myofascially connected to the diaphragm. So this teaches us that everything is connected and everything is hardwired within the body to be stimulated through these lines. And I also believe that the myofascial meridians that was discovered not many years ago are simply rooted in the acupuncture meridians, and that the nature of the acupuncture points are simply rooted in our fascia.
Interesting. What's your thoughts on stretching versus fascia release? Do you stretch with people? Do you get them stretched, or does that go against what we're trying to do with the fascia?
Yeah, you shouldn't stretch fascia. Stretching is something that we do to, of course, become more flexible. But if you take the analogy of a band, for example, if you take a rubber band, and you stretch it and keep the static stretch for minutes or hours, eventually this will tear. And that's kind of the same that we do with our bodies. So we are increasing the plasticity, but we are not increasing the mobility. And mobility is the end goal. So when you see people do a split or any other static stretch, they want to be more mobile, but they're just getting more plastic. So they are getting more length, but not more mobility within that length. So ideally what we need to do, and what we have done for millennia, is to move in broad direction that stimulates these stretches within the fascia. So that's how we need to stretch. And also you cannot stretch a myofascial restriction away. So let's say you have a trigger point here or here or here. You cannot stretch it away. Another band analogy is that if you wrap a knot on a band and the knot is the trigger point, and you stretch on the knot, you're only worsening the trigger points. So you don't want to do that. You want to release the trigger point by applying myofascial releases. And when you have released the area, then you can begin to stretch it, but not in a traditional manner, simply by doing movement. Because we don't want to be more flexible. We want to become more mobile.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I always think I've got a 2-year-old downstairs. And so I'm always like, well, I'm an old dad because I'm like a 43-year-old dad. So it's like I need to really think about the functional movements I do now, because when he's 20, I'm going to be 60. So I'm always thinking about like function. So here's one for you. I've got like super, super tight hamstrings. So like, what would you do with me with those hamstrings? I'm trying to stretch them out, but now based on what you're saying, probably stretching them out might not be the best thing to do there.
Yeah, and also a side note to your little child there. Again, have you seen the positions that they're able to move in? Like, that's insane. And it's not abnormal. Of course, children have more water within their bodies than we have as adults, which means that they can just move their bodies in weird directions. But the reason that we are so immobile and they are so mobile is simply because that we have lost it during adolescence. Because we did some shitty stuff like gaming or tearing up our bodies in the gym or injuries or whatever. So we need to return to that child state. That is not an alien state. That's just the state that we have left for whatever reason. But to answer your question, what I would do with flexibility issues is I would reintegrate again the hydration within the area. Because dehydration can also mean that the area is not able to move sufficiently. Like, remember what I talked about with this sticky version of the fascia and the muscle. this can be the issue of the immobility, that your hamstring is simply not able to stretch enough because it's dehydrated. So always start with that. The myofascial releases will fix that at, I don't know, like 80% of the time. If that doesn't work, then you need to move within broader direction. All you need to do stretches that stretches the hamstring but stimulates it at the same time. So I have some weird stretches where you stretch the hamstring with a band that pulls you into a torso rotation. So while you stretch the hamstring, you move into a torso rotation, which is natural within that movement. So that's what you need to do. It's kind of difficult for me to explain because these weird movements are not something traditional that you can go up in a gym and see, but it's to let you know that everything must be movement-based. Passive stretching doesn't do any good.
I've always felt that to be the case. That static stretching is not helping, and yet without a clear roadmap, it's just been the default, I think, for me and a few other people. But no, that's good. I mean, because I always find like the hamstrings, it's such a meaty area. Like how are you getting in there? Are you using a device like a ball or something? Because I feel like it's so dense. Like to get in there, it's quite tough.
It is quite tough, and there are also several hamstring muscles, so it is a kind of a bulky area. When you do it manually, it's kind of easy because you can glide your fingers in between or you can hold the pressure, but to do it yourself is kind of difficult. What I would do is to take a large medicine ball, so at the size of a football, for example, very, very hard, dense, of course, then sit down on the ground on a dense surface, and then you rest your hamstring on the ball, rest the other leg on the top of the hamstring, so it applies the pressure directly onto the ball. That's a way to do it, to allow gravity to apply the pressure and release these systems within it. Sometimes a small lacrosse ball won't work because the area is so big, for example, as the hamstring is, so the ball simply disappears within the area without applying the pressure that you need.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, you can definitely do it yourself, and it is more easy than you think.
Okay.
Just don't believe that you can use foam rollers and any soft materials to do the releases, because they will simply bounce or not being able to apply the pressure that you need, because the pressure happens on the soft surface on the foam roller and not on your hamstring, if that's the case.
Okay. So it has to be a hard surface you use or a soft surface?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely hard. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. All right. So if we can talk a little bit about the mechanics and about strengthening breath mechanics now. So I loved what you said about the bands around the rib cage. That's fascinating. So could you talk a bit about how you're improving diaphragm strength and also rib cage mobility? Like what are you doing there with people?
Yeah, again, first, it's important to notice this rib cage breathing thing, because a lot of people talk about abdominal breathing, neglecting that we don't have any respiratory muscles within the abdomen that is guiding the inhalation. The same with chest breathing. More people know that that's a no-go, but we don't want to elevate the chest, because then we are simply doing sympathetic mechanics. We want to expand the diaphragm, and the diaphragm is located within the rib cage. So this is why I'm emphasizing all the time rib cage expansion. So again, if we want to strengthen the diaphragm, this can be something as simple as holding your breath, because then you are contracting the diaphragm as much as possible, like contracting your biceps as much as possible, and then you're holding this contraction on the inhalation for 10, 20, 30 seconds, something like that, and releasing it again. Something as simple as that is strengthening of the diaphragm. As with any other muscle, we need to remember that it's a muscle. So I came up with another thing, because I saw people like putting dumbbells on their rib cage and doing all sort of weird stuff. And I thought, well, why don't we treat the diaphragm the same way that we treat our biceps or chest muscles or hamstring or whatever? Why can't we apply load to it and strengthening it the same way that we do with all other muscles? So I thought, how do we do that? And I started with applying bands to the lateral portions of the rib cage. So one band going one direction, one band going in the other direction. And then I simply just breathe against the bands. So that is one way to do it, but that is less multidirectional because we know that the diaphragm is applying to the rib cage in all directions, so both in the front and the back and at the sides. So we need this 360-degree direction expansion. So that's why I found this method to apply a band to your thoracic cavity that applies both on the front, on the side, and the back. So every time you take a breath, you're breathing against the entirety of the bands by utilizing only the diaphragm.
Yeah.
So this is mainly how I've come to strengthen the diaphragm now, is to apply this band and then do some deep breathing, especially on the inhalation. So you do some guided, aggressive inhalations. Then you can, for example, combine it with holding your breath, because then you get double up on the strengthening part, and then you release. So you don't exhale, you just release. Then you're starting over again. So this is just contraction-based training, as you would do in a gym with improving any other muscular function.
Yeah, I love that. And what would be a minimum effective dose there, do you think, Mads? Like, how long would you get someone to do that? Is it like a couple of minutes a day, or are you going for longer?
No, a couple of minutes per day is good. Even a couple of minutes per week, maybe. Okay. You just need to accustom your diaphragm to expand, because what we don't know today is how to let our diaphragms expand, and that's basically the biggest issue. So the health conscious people are even bad at this, because they still think that it is the abdominal expansion that is guiding proper breathing. But you can see what I mean with the diaphragm and the rib cage and this 360-degree expansion. If you're only expanding your abdomen forward, then you're not getting this expansion or this stimulation of the diaphragm. So that is part number one, to simply stimulate it. I also often combine it with biomechanical stuff. So you apply this band, you do your movement, you learn how to contract your pelvis, contract your core, while guiding your breathing into the rib cage. Because I'm training a lot of UFC fighters, football players, musicians, and all that stuff. And the common thing that they don't know how to do is to activate their muscles, especially their core, while breathing correctly. Because they want to breathe with their abdomen subconsciously, or they don't have the core muscles to stabilize them. And that affects their breathing. So when I ask them to breathe correctly while moving, they breathe correctly, but stop moving correctly. And if I ask them to move correctly, they start moving correctly, but they lose their breathing. So they don't have this combination, relationship between the breathing and the movement. And that is the main thing that we need today, I think. Learning how to move while breathing correctly. We have lost that entirely. And I think it's because we're sitting down all the time. So we don't have this core function. We don't have the deep breathing. Everything happens in a superficial manner.
Are you covering just the bottom ribs, or are you using those bands to cover quite a few of the ribs? Like, how much of the rib cage are you kind of strapping up?
Oh, it is the majority of the ribs. So it is covering from the bottom, from the lowest ribs, and even up to the shoulders. So there are different layers of the bands. So despite however you breathe, you cannot avoid stimulating yourself.
Yeah.
Again, unless you breathe with your chest, then you're stimulating something else of what you want to achieve.
That's a good one, actually. So if somebody comes to you and they're doing this and the shoulders are, how are you breaking that cycle of shoulder activation?
Well, I'm teaching them how to rib cage breathe, and that can be very difficult because people need to know how to expand the rib cage, and I had difficulties with that in the beginning as well. So what I normally tell people is to place their hands on their rib cage. Then they can easily feel whether the hands are expanding laterally or not. If they're not expanding laterally, it may mean that they're going on movement in the chest. So what you can do is place your hands like this on your rib cage, and then you should see your hands separate when you do the breathing. If not, that's an issue. And again, back to what we just talked about, you can also do some biofeedback stuff. So you apply the bands, and then you should feel the bands expanding when you breathe on your rib cage. So we can do some different stuff to stimulate that portion. And again, the end goal is to really fill the entirety of the lungs with oxygen, because if we are chest breathers, shallow breathers, we're only filling up the top portion of the lungs.
Yes.
And that is that's not good.
No. And in terms of the ribs themselves then and those intercostal muscles, and I know as we age, they can become a little bit tight and a bit more brittle for some people. Like, what are you doing with the ribs? Like, is there anything else you can do with the ribs to help that vital capacity?
Oh, it's a different one. You can also stimulate the intercostals, but they are these very, very small tender muscles like the spare ribs when you buy the spare ribs, right? So they are quite difficult to access. They are quite difficult or quite painful to massage on. So I wouldn't think too much about the ribs. I would rather think about the diaphragm, because the diaphragm is affecting the ribs. So if we need proper rib expansion, yes, we can work with the intercostals, but working with the diaphragm, working with improving the range of motion within the rib cage is the effective way to go by it.
Okay, that makes sense. And in your experience, when it comes to diaphragms getting stronger, like what if somebody came to you today, like what sort of protocols do you go on? Like, would you say like you're going to see good results in 6 months, in a year, in 6 weeks? Like, if someone's trying to make their diaphragm stronger and get that more movement in the center of their body, like how long do these things generally take?
Oh, it depends. It depends, but we can talk about how to measure it, because measuring is the best way that we can see whether it improves or not. And so that is one thing more mechanically, that we need to be able to see the rib cage expand. Like sometimes with clients, you cannot see any movement at all. You can see that they have been paralyzed in their diaphragms for so many years. So just the mere effect of seeing expansion, it's kind of difficult to measure it. Maybe if you had a measuring band around the rib cage, but merely the visualization of the expansion is a good way to assess whether there is progress. Or number two, simply to assess the BOLD score. Another thing that I learned from Patrick, the BOLD score, which is more like the breathing ability stuff, like how good are you at utilizing the oxygen that you have in your body and tolerating CO2. So that is, again, that is the end goal of everything, that we need to be better at exchanging oxygen with CO2. So doing the BOLD score and getting your score up above 40 seconds is the end goal of everything. The other thing are just mechanical stuff that we need in the process of becoming better breathers.
Yeah. This is going to be quite nuanced now, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this. So there's a whole world out there of CO2 breathwork schools versus mechanical breathwork schools. And similar to you, I like to look at all of it and bring the best parts in when I'm working with clients. But I have on good authority, and I've seen this myself actually, when you release the body, when you start to get that diaphragm moving properly and we reduce the shoulders and we can open up the body, we see the BOLT score increase anyway, without even doing slow breathing techniques. Have you come across any of this? Is this something you've come across in your work or not so much?
Oh, it's different, or it's difficult for me to tell, because I always do it as in combination.
Sure.
So we do the breath work, like I said, the RSA breathing, the release, the strengthening, the activation. We do it all at once. So I haven't separated it, but it would make sense that merely by becoming better mechanical breathers, merely by teaching your diaphragm how to expand, teaching your body how to guide oxygen down to the lowest portion of the lungs will make your breathing abilities or your BOLD score even better. That makes sense, because everything starts from the mechanics points. So if you were to measure that, yes, I'm 100% sure that you would definitely see a benefit just by doing the mechanic stuff. Because when you are increasing your diaphragm abilities, again, you are becoming able to guide air down to the deepest portion of the lungs, where we know that blood flow is greatest. So by being able to guide breathing down there, you can guide more oxygen out in your body through the blood. So the blood oxygenation gets better merely by improving your diaphragm function.
Yeah.
So yes, absolutely. But why not do it both when you can do that to get double the results?
Makes sense. Yeah. Last couple of questions I want to ask you about is sleep optimization. So biohacker, breathwork, fascia. There is a lot of fairly common, obvious things around sleep hygiene these days: dark room, cool room, hot bath before bed, the glasses, right? But maybe if you could share with us, are there any other things we should be considering if we want to get really good sleep, really good rest? Like, what are the things that you might tell people to do to get the best sleep of their lives?
It's actually pretty simple. And we can do a lot of stuff, as you say. We can use the blue light blockers. We can take glycine and magnesium before we go to bed. We can cool down our bedroom to 18 to 19 degrees Celsius. We can use blackout curtains. We can do everything. But if we don't have a circadian rhythm that is in balance, then everything else doesn't matter, because then you're just recalibrating. So circadian rhythm is this rhythm that aligns all processes within your body, like, for example, sleep. So the most important thing, according to sleep, which is just a little part of the circadian rhythm, is to have a consistent sleep schedule. Like I always tell people, don't set your alarm clock to when you need to wake up. Set it to when you need to go to bed. Because if you go to bed at the same time every day, you wake up at the same time every day. And that's what your body needs. Your body needs consistency. And if you do that, then you will get these 7, 8, 9 hours every day without any issues, without any need for an alarm clock. So a circadian rhythm in balance, the thing that you need to get as much natural light as possible within the first part of the day, see the sunrise, get a lot of natural light to kickstart your hormonal processes that are responsible for the wakefulness. Because these wakefulness processes also tells your body that 16 hours after you wake up, it needs to go to sleep. So the wakefulness and the sleepiness components about the circadian rhythms are interconnected. Yeah. So it's the wakefulness process and it's the wind down process. It's consistency in your schedule. It's seeing the sunset, because seeing the sunset tells your brain that it's soon time to produce melatonin. But again, we have some issues in some parts of the world. In Denmark now, the sun sets at 9:30, and I'm asleep at there, so I cannot see the sunset. Instead, I need to actually shield the natural light, because we need darkness in order for the melatonin process to kickstart in our bodies. And melatonin is responsible for making us sleepy. So within 2 to 3 hours before bed, you need to start your sleep schedule, your sleep processes. You need to wind down mentally. You need your core body temperature to go down, because we know that a decline in core body temperature is responsible for not just a good but also deep sleep. We need to stop eating a couple hours before bed to avoid indigestion and to avoid too many digestive processes going on in our bodies. So this is a multidimensional approach. You need to wind down both in terms of the light, both in terms of your cognitive stimuli, both in terms of your metabolic rate. Everything needs to slow down. At approximately 2 hours before bed, I turn off all online presence. So no more Instagram, no more emails, no more anything, because I need to get into that parasympathetic state. You cannot sleep in a sympathetic state. So that can be having some good conversations, being outside, reading a book, fiction, because non-fiction stimulates you. Seeing a movie that you're not too engaged in, doing all this stuff with shut off lighting, with blue light blockers, if you watch the TV, for example. So these are the most important things, and I think that we need to take into consideration stress as well, because a lot of people are doing these intense protocols, but they're not winding down mentally. And then when they hit the pillow, like everything, all processes starts within the brain. So we need to take that into consideration as well. And then there's also the little thing about the blackout curtains, because just as we need to black out all light when we sleep, we need light when we wake up. So few people talk about the fact that if you use blackout curtains, then it's pitch black when you go to bed, but it's also pitch black when you wake up. So you don't have this natural wake up process. So I also use blackout curtains because I fall asleep like this when I use it. But I keep just a slide open at the bottom to allow light to get in the morning, because otherwise you'll feel sluggish when you wake up.
That's good. I hadn't thought about that one. That's an extra one. I like that. Because, we've got everything's blacked out. So in the morning, it takes a bit of time. Yeah. Okay. No, wonderful. Is there anything we haven't covered that you wanted to cover, Mads?
there's a lot of things we haven't covered, but I think that would be for another conversation. But I think this has been a good one. We've been good all round. Of course, we haven't been able to dig deep into all of the topics. That's kind of difficult when we move within the longevity and biohacking field. But I think we've covered a lot of
me
good
too.
stuff.
I'd love to do it again, and we could go deeper because I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, indeed.
Any final words to leave people with?
Get outside. Really get outside. And I guess ask this all the time, like, what is your number one advice? Or if you have to give 3 advices, blah, 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 like, get outside, be in nature. We are natural beings. And I would say 90% of all our issues today would be solved simply by removing our artificial environments and being more outside. It is so freaking simple.
I love it. I just got a standing desk for outside, and so I'm very often barefoot, shirt off when the weather allows me, working on the laptop out there. And I have to say, it's been one of the biggest game changers of my life doing that. I just feel so good. I feel like I'm on vacation every day I'm doing that. It's lovely.
Yeah, but that's also because you have the natural connection to earth. You're grounded. You're not exposed to the blue light toxicity that you are right now because you're inside. You can actually watch a screen without getting the blue light toxicity because you're also getting the natural rays of the sun. And you can see here, it's difficult to see, but I have my windows cracked open. And that is simply because having them cracked open allows the natural light to come in because of what's called wave-particle duality. So light simply travels in waves. So if you just allow a crack open the window, then light can travel in and transform the light environment inside. So that would be ideal for people to do that are inside the office for an entire day.
Yeah, we do that in the car now as well, actually. We crack the window a little bit on the car. Same thing, just let a bit of light not going through the glass. So I'm very new on this light diet. We have you come across Dr. Jack Cruz? Do you know who that guy is?
Oh, yeah. Jack has been my mentor for the last 2 years. I think he's writing the foreword to my next book. I've met him several times. He's a controversial figure, but he's fucking smart.
He's very good. Yeah. We just did part 2 last week, so we've not released that yet. So we did part 1 did very, very well. But that's where I've got all of, because when you're saying these things, I'm like, oh, that's really in line with what Jack was telling me. So it's the only bit, I'll just get your thoughts on this actually. Jack told me to get a UVA and a UVB bulb for inside the house to get some vitamin D. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that? Have you ever considered doing that, or have you tried that?
Absolutely. It's a bit dangerous because they overheat very quickly. But yeah, it is a good thing. Again, back to the increasing the color spectrum of the rainbow. So instead of you only getting the blue light, then you're also getting the UV. The same way that you're using the infrared panel is to get the infrared wavelengths.
Yeah.
I kind of supplement a bit with sunbeds in the winter months for the same reason. Mm-hmm. UV light in isolation is not too good. We already know that it can mutate cells. But I believe that if we do it controlled on a controlled level without getting sunburns, it can actually benefit in the winter months where we get 0 UV. Yeah. So that's kind of the same advice, I guess, that Jack.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. I didn't know you had that connection. That's so nice.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
People can find me mainly on Instagram. That's where I post all my research and entertain people. And that's MT Performance DK. The name of my brand is MT Performance. I have a website, mtperformance.co. So, but yeah, use Instagram. That's where the magic happens.
Beautiful. We'll get people the link down below. So if you're watching this or listening to this, Mad's links are down below for you to click on after this podcast. Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much. And until part 2, thanks, Mads. And thanks everyone for watching.
Likewise, mate. Thank you. See you.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed that fascia related conversation. I find the world of fascia fascinating. So a couple of things to help with your own learning and to share with other people. Put a comment down below on the YouTube video and just let us know something that you've learned or that stood out for you. And that will help you retain it and also help other people. And if you like that, I'm going to link to a couple of other videos that you can enjoy next. And if you are interested in learning more about how fascia links into all of the other intricate parts of our body and how we can use these tools to truly relax, get better sleep, feel more rested, have more energy, then I've put together a completely free 60-minute training. You can register for that down below. It won't be up forever, so grab that link if you can now and go through that process, and I'll walk you through the biggest free training that I've ever done step by step how to use what we call the reset protocol or the reset method to help us use things like breath work and fascia release to get the best relaxation and energy possible. All right. Thank you for watching this channel. I really appreciate you being here. There's 1,000 things you could have done. So the fact that you're here is amazing. So click one of these links and we'll see you soon. Cheers.